It's one of the most controversial names in gaming, but there's more to this series than mindless violence. Okay, I mean,
if you're gonna kill anyone, kill the fat one!
There is a lot of mindless violence, but there's other stuff too. Welcome to MojoPlays, and today we're going to be taking a look at the origins of the Grand Theft Auto franchise.
You do the driving and the shooting and the dally in a boot. We'll make sure you don't get cold feet here. You'll need a piece.
Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to MojoPlays and click on the links in the description to vote on upcoming content. The very first iteration of GTA began with a simple idea. What if, instead of building a linear game with goals and checkpoints, gamers were given a sandbox to explore in a way that they wanted? Sure, this wasn't a wholly original idea. Open world games, depending on whose definition you go with, are practically as old as the medium itself. Some even cite the text-based 1976 game Colossal Cave Adventure as the first game with an open world, even though that world wasn't even rendered and only existed in the player's mind. Others present the space exploration game Elite from 1984 as the first fully open digital space, where players could technically drift off in any direction. There are plenty of other games that some would claim as the capital F first open world game, but it's a pretty contentious topic. Much less contentious, however, is the impact that the first game in the Legend of Zelda series had on the whole genre. This wasn't a cave that existed in your mind or a black screen meant to represent the endless void of space. No. This was a fully realized fantastical world that players could explore any way they wanted, and it inspired a generation of young gamers, some of whom would eventually go on to make games themselves. Developed in Dundee, Scotland by DMA Design, the guys behind Lemmings if you can believe it, and published by BMG Interactive, the project that would eventually become the first Grand Theft Auto began with the simplistic and incredibly descriptive title of Race and Chase, a top-down game where players could collect weapons, steal cars, and cause mayhem across 3 cities: Liberty City, Vice City, and San Andreas. BMG Interactive was the video game publishing arm of Bertelsmann Music Group Entertainment, and their slate of released games since launching in 1994 was not great. They did, however, have a duo of up-and-coming producers, brothers Sam and Dan Houser, that had gotten their hands on a preview of Race and Chase, and fully buying into the concept of a game that prioritized player freedom over objective-based gameplay, signed the game to BMG Interactive. Sam and Dan would eventually take on an even bigger and much more direct role in the direction of the franchise, but we'll get back to that later. Bugs and poor performance quality nearly got that game cancelled, but a slight change to the AI of the in-game police helped the team find their footing.
That's what it felt like right at the end. It's like, we just got to put this out now, because if we don't, it's just going to break again, and we've lost it forever.
Race and Chase, now thankfully retitled as Grand Theft Auto, was released in October of 1997 and overperformed compared to BMG Interactive's other games, selling particularly well in the UK. The game was later ported to the Sony PlayStation in June 1998, which only increased the reach of a game that was getting a lot of lip service in the gaming community.
You steal cars, you run over policemen, and you shoot people in the head.
What it lacked, however, was polish, as critics praised the concept but trashed the graphical performance. 2 mission packs were later released in 1999, GTA London 1969 and GTA London 1961, which added more content but did little to address the main gripes that critics had. In May of 1998, while the pieces were being put in place for a sequel that would fix the shortcomings of the original, Take-Two Interactive swooped in and bought up BMG Interactive and all of their properties, including Grand Theft Auto. The brothers responsible for bringing the property to BMG in the first place were tasked with overseeing its future, and Rockstar Games, a subsidiary of Take-Two, was formed in December of 1998. Alongside Terry Donovan and Jamie King, London-born brothers Sam and Dan packed up, moved to New York City, and set up shop in Take-Two's offices. While all of this was going on, DMA was still hard at work on the second game, Grand Theft Auto 2, released on September 30th, 1999 for PC, and October 22nd for PlayStation. Grand Theft Auto 2 delivered on many of the promises of the first game, with a brand new setting, Anywhere City, and a new mechanic that would allow players to work with or against any of the 7 gangs littered throughout the open world. Each of these gangs had a distinct look, vehicle, and territory on the map, and doing certain missions would allow the player to gain favor with one gang and make enemies of the other. Unfortunately, despite iterating on the previous entry and adding new mechanics, the game received mixed reviews from critics. It it remained kind of a novelty among gamers, as nothing else on the market was offering the kind of open-world destructive madness that would become the bread and butter of the young franchise. The series still needed a shakeup though, and it was about to get one, in a big way.
Yeah, I'm sure your new lapdog has everything covered.
That change came in the form of the leap to 3D. Rather than continuing to deliver iterations of the same game, the Housers decided to take on a creative role, with Dan taking on writing duties, in order to turn GTA into a franchise with wide appeal that stretched beyond the typical gamer demographic.
The way that Sam spoke about his vision for where he was going to take the game for 3 and moving on from 3, it felt to me like this is the guy that's going to make it actually work.
The Housers relied on a number of influences, from Goodfellas to Ocarina of Time, in order to come up with how a 3-dimensional Grand Theft Auto would look, feel, sound, and most importantly play. Instead of a giant sandbox with standalone, disconnected missions scattered throughout, this game would introduce narrative to the franchise, with detailed cutscenes and voice acting to add a cinematic feel, which tied the missions all together into a cohesive story. The result was basically an interactive gangster movie, and a 3D sandbox environment the likes of which no one had really seen before.
Well, this city is one big open sewer!
Unlike previous entries, GTA 3 was widely praised, and became one of the best-selling games of the year, and one of PlayStation 2's biggest hits when it released in October of 2001. But that wide appeal came with attention. Lawmakers and politicians began to take notice of the ultra-violence that the game wore on its sleeve.
Hey, take it easy, amigo. No es nada, no es nada.
The now infamous Jack Thompson became one of the series' biggest detractors. Years after the game's release, Thompson filed a $246 million lawsuit against Take-Two, Sony, and Walmart, on behalf of the victims of 2 teenage brothers who had told investigators that GTA 3 had inspired them to take the rifles out of a locked room in their house and shoot at passing cars in the distance, killing 45-year-old Aaron Hamill and seriously wounding 19-year-old Kimberly Bede. Ultimately, aside from the tragic consequences, nothing came of that ordeal, but it wouldn't be the last time the folks at Rockstar would hear from Jack Thompson.
I'd say 80% of the male students in colleges are spending their spare time playing these games.
Just months after the release of GTA 3, DMA Design was acquired by Rockstar and was eventually renamed Rockstar North, now an official arm of the company. And work quickly began on a brand new game. How do you follow up an ambitious mega hit like GTA 3? Well, in the case of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, Rockstar decided to take what worked in the last game and just make it bigger, bolder, and even more cinematic.
Son, you help me, and any greaseballs giving you a hard time, I'll see to it they take a long dirt nap.
Set in 1986 Vice City, a stand-in for Miami, the Houser brothers moved away from the mobster movie-inspired tone of 3, and instead went for something closer to Miami Vice or Scarface, with bright colors, palm trees, and bikinis. With a much bigger budget, Rockstar also brought in well-known actors like Ray Liotta, who lent his voice to the main character Tommy Vercetti, and worked hard to raise the profile of the game.
Don't take it personally, my dear.
They also introduced an incredibly well-curated soundtrack, filled with music of the era spread across multiple radio stations, an in-game element that has since become a staple of the franchise. Again, the bold choices paid off, and Rockstar had yet another critically acclaimed best-selling hit on their hands, fully establishing Grand Theft Auto as a premier franchise. So, anticipation for the next entry immediately set in. Just like before,
No one does this to me. No one.
Jack Thompson reared his head once again, filing 2 separate $600 million lawsuits against Take-Two and Sony regarding separate murders in which Vice City was cited as the cause. Both were dismissed, but Rockstar's reputation for conjuring controversy was becoming part of their brand, for better or for worse.
This isn't the bloodiest game ever. This isn't the most violent game ever. This is the biggest game ever.
GTA 3 and Vice City had come out almost exactly 1 year apart, so the team at Rockstar North were granted a little more time to deliver what they considered to be the 3rd game in their new and improved 3D series. So far, the settings of each of the first 2 ventures into 3D space had been set in 2 of the 3 cities that had been created way back in the first top-down game. So, logically, the next sandbox would have to be set in sunny San Andreas. In the first game, San Andreas was a city on the west coast of the United States that was meant to be a stand-in for San Francisco, but it was reimagined as a whole state that was 1 part Nevada, 2 parts California. While the previous 2 games presented players with giant explorable cities, Rockstar upped the ante by including 3 distinct explorable cities: Los Santos, San Fierro, and Las Venturas. each with their own look and feel.
You see it as an outlet? Absolutely. I mean, it's entertainment, you know?
This obviously presented a bit of a continuity problem, leading Rockstar to eventually announce that there are in fact 3 separate GTA universes. The 2D universe, which encompasses the first 2 top-down games of the franchise, the 3D universe, which includes GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas, GTA Advance, and both Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories, and finally the HD universe, which kicked off with Grand Theft Auto 4. You see, Zelda and GTA have more in common than you thought.
I mean, what's up with that, huh?
GTA San Andreas released in October of 2004, almost exactly 2 years since the release of Vice City. In terms of sales, critical reception, and controversy, the game picked up right where the last one left off, as Rockstar shocked the world yet again with another stellar game in the franchise. It was once again the best-selling game of the year, and would eventually become the best-selling PS2 game of all time.
Shit, I told you he was crazy.
But of course you can't talk about San Andreas without mentioning the infamous hot coffee incident. Most of you have probably heard this story before, especially if you watched a few Watch Mojo videos, but just to quickly recap before we move on. A sex minigame was initially created to be included in the main game, but realizing that this would force the ESRB to change the game's rating from M to mature to adults only, which would have a massive impact on sales, access to the minigame was removed in the version that shipped to consumers. However, Rockstar chose to not remove the code for the minigame from the game files in order to save time, because who's going to look through a bunch of code to find something that no one knew was there in the first place? Well, gamers, that's who. It didn't take long for people to start digging through the files. A modder by the name of Patrick Wildenborg found a number of files with names like sex and kissing in the game's source code, and patiently awaited the release of the PC version in June of 2005 to see if he could activate these secret animations. It turns out the answer was a big old yes, and Patrick released a mod that would toggle on the hidden content to the public. The media soon picked up the story, lawsuits were filed, Rockstar was accused of failing to disclose the game's sexual content, and of course Jack Thompson reared his head yet again.
The United Kingdom has a law that says no one under 18 can buy this game.
This cost the company, well, a lot, as they were also mandated by the ESRB to patch previously sold copies of the game and replace the version that was being printed and sold with the one that completely erased the hidden content, lest they be branded with the dreaded adults-only rating. There are plenty of conspiracy theories that claim that Rockstar purposefully left these files in the game for others to find and activate so that they wouldn't have to deal with the backlash but could still keep the content in the game. But ultimately, if avoiding backlash was their intent, then it's fair to say that they all failed. Rockstar had to regroup. Since their big jump to 3D, their strategy was to iterate on successful aspects of GTA 3, which granted them the ability to basically pump out these huge games kinda quickly. But with a new console generation on the horizon, they needed to think bigger and challenge themselves in order to give the franchise a shot in the arm. Rockstar was about to leave the so-called 3D universe behind and enter the strange and exciting world of HD.
Nico, my cousin! I can't believe it, you're here!
Work began not long after the release of San Andreas, and the first question on everyone's mind was, where's it gonna be set? Well, both the 2D and 3D universes began in Liberty City. So, what better place to kick off the next generation of Grand Theft Auto titles? Curiously, rather than sticking to the naming convention of the past 2 games, even though it confused the hell out of a lot of people.
Yes, Vlad. Sorry. Forgive me, okay? No, please don't cut my cock off.
Grand Theft Auto 4 was announced at E3 2006, and the hype was palpable. Working with their own proprietary game engine, Rage, Rockstar were about to enter a new era. Dan Houser was once again put in charge of writing the game's story, teaming up with Rupert Humphreys to deliver something that would take the franchise in a new direction tone-wise.
I got this film genius here, making me look like a transsexual or something on TV, and now some punk's been talking all kinds of shit.
While the last 3 GTA games were clearly homages to crime movies in various genres, this game would present a new kind of story that was unique and character-driven. In trying to deviate from the archetypes they'd been borrowing from the movies they'd loved, they crafted the character of Niko Bellic, an Eastern European man with a dark past who is motivated by revenge and redemption.
Still waiting for his big break, eh?
Big break? Sure. I promise I'll comfort to a fool on Nico.
GTA 4 was eventually pushed back to a release date of April 2008 due to technical issues during production. According to reports that came out after a new release date was announced, the developers at Rockstar North were facing problems from both next-gen platforms. The PS3 was presenting a slew of technical issues, while the storage capabilities of the Xbox 360 also halted progress on the game.
If there is a problem, I'll go.
At an estimated production cost of roughly $100 million, Grand Theft Auto 4 became the most expensive video game ever produced. Once again, upon release though, the game was met with immediate critical acclaim. The combat system felt modern and fresh, the city was as big and beautiful as it had ever been, and the story was a dark and personal character study that felt completely original.
Forget about your hair, Florian. Bernie.
The game also supported online multiplayer, where 32 players could run around Liberty City together causing chaos. It seemed like all of Sam and Dean Houser's ambitious creative decisions had finally paid off. As of 2011, 20 million copies of the game had been sold, and by 2013, that game had reached 25 million.
What are you doing in there?
I got scared.
2 episodes of DLC were released in 2009, The Lost and the Damned and The Ballad of Gay Tony, each putting the player in control of new protagonists and featuring new detailed stories and missions that took place throughout Liberty City, raising the amount of characters and adding an extra level of personality and charm to an already exceptional digital sandbox.
Nice to meet you, Muscles.
Both were well received and were considered groundbreaking DLC, but what fans didn't realize was that the concept of multiple playable characters existing within the same sandbox was about to, yet again, revitalize the franchise. We should also note that it also set an expectation for additional single-player content in future titles. Again, more on that later.
Is there anything else my team can do for you?
Once again, Rockstar was already hard at work on their much-anticipated follow-up shortly after the release of GTA 4. An updated version of the Rage engine was to be the foundation of the team's most ambitious project to date, a return to San Andreas. Rather than recreate the 3 cities that had made up the open world of the last game, set in the fictionalized version of the Sunshine State, Dan Houser decided that they should focus their attention on Los Santos to create as sprawling and immersive a cityscape as possible. They also wanted to have enormous landscapes of wilderness to explore, as previous games had focused almost exclusively on creating a giant metropolis.
You gotta slow it up, man! That's a sharp left!
In terms of the game's story and characters, Dan Houser wanted to include 3 playable protagonists from the get-go, one to represent the 3 thematic pillars of the franchise: greed, ambition, and insanity. The story built on the tone of the previous game, but while 4 was about Nico's journey, the addition of multiple main characters gave the narrative a grander scope.
If that's our standard for goodness, no wonder this country's screwed.
Sure, it was less personal, but by extension, the stakes were much higher. The game was announced kind of unceremoniously via Rockstar's website and Twitter, but no fanfare was really necessary. The hype train was up and running. Finally, that game released on September of 2013 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, followed a year later with an updated HD re-release for PS4 and Xbox One, and finally a PC version in April of 2016. It shattered records, not just in terms of the games industry, but across the cultural production industry as a whole, creating $1 billion in just 3 days and becoming the fastest-selling entertainment product ever.
Oh yeah, I forgot, huh? 401ks, tax returns and all.
It currently sits as the 3rd best-selling game of all time, with 85 million units sold, and is considered by many to be the best open-world game of all time. By the way, check out our video of the best open world game of all time. Spoiler alert, it's not GTA 5.
One of these assholes is having a seizure or something.
While fans eagerly anticipated another Lost and the Damned or Ballad of Gay Tony, it actually never came. Instead, Rockstar continued to support GTA Online, which got off to a pretty rocky start, but has since become one of the most played multiplayer games ever. Some see this as a detriment to a franchise that's always delivered stellar single-player experiences, while others commended Rockstar for crafting a massively multiplayer game with continued support and practically endless content.
Grand Theft Auto Online brings the freedom of the Grand Theft Auto experience to multiple players in a dynamic, shared world.
So, what does the future hold for the Grand Theft Auto franchise? The massive success of Grand Theft Auto Online has certainly changed the trajectory of how Rockstar sees itself and its cash cow, and will undoubtedly be a major focus for the next game. Sure, many fans would love some single-player DLC, but if the history of the franchise has taught us anything, it's that this is a property that is always reinventing itself. Sure, today it's online, but what comes next? I'd guess you'd have to ask Sam and Dan.
Don't get all serious, okay? Anybody can make a mistake.
Perhaps now you want to kill me.
Yeah, maybe, old man.
Thanks for watching MojoPlays. Be sure to subscribe and click on the link in the description below to check out our suggestion page and vote on what content you'd like to see us cover next.